good afternoon. It's our pleasure to invite you to PSB Academy New Campus and to our open day. Can you tell us more about Land Transport Authority and what does it do?
The Land Transport Authority in Singapore is responsible for everything that moves on the land. So the most obvious one is the trains. So we've got the MRTs, then we've got the buses, and then we regulate the taxis, plan the roads, plan the rails. So if it moves on land, we have some sort of input. Even personal mobility devices, so the scooters that seem to annoy everyone, all the rules about how they're used, the assisted bicycles, all those, they're regulated by the LTA. So unlike other countries, because Singapore is small, the LTA is able to do it for not just the city but the entire country. So it gives a really good joined up and consistent approach right the way across the country.
You started your career as an engineer and moved on to be a manager, and now the Deputy Chief Specialist in Signaling. So can you summarize to us what are the skill sets needed in different nodes and how do we pick up those skills?
In terms of, the skill sets I need to do my current job are mainly technical. Whilst I have run departments in terms of having a team of engineers, my main skills are in the technical area. And so I've always concentrated on gaining technical knowledge. So that's been my primary aim. But you have to do, most technical engineers do have to do some management. So in my last department, I had probably about 35 staff working for me, and so you need to do training. So it's all about, some of it you learn on the job. Colleagues will give you advice, but you also got to do training courses and actually really learn. And it's not, sometimes it's not obvious things. It's things like learning to interview people properly when they're applying for a job, to make sure that you can select the right candidates. So all kinds of skills. How do you actually assess someone? When you've got staff, you've got to make sure that they're effective. So you've got to make sure that you properly review their performance and then give them fair advice in terms of how they can improve their performance and how they can develop. So it's not just about what you can do, it's also about what you can do for others and to get the best out of them. It takes quite a long while to learn. It comes more naturally to some people than others, but it's all part of the development process.
So we know that you have been very active in IET Singapore Network. So can you share with us what are the benefits?
IET Network here in Singapore, IET has a lot of members here in Singapore, and one of the big advantages of being a member here in Singapore is that it's the opportunity to meet up with like-minded engineers. Going to the talks, it's incredible what you can pick up. I'll give you an example. There was a talk last year on the developments in power systems, and two of my colleagues who are chief specialist for power and an assistant chief specialist, they went away from that meeting and they had in their inbox from their boss the next day, you need to follow up on these things. Okay? Because they hadn't heard about them. The guy got up, talked about these new concepts in lighting and power distribution, and so we thought, right, we need to investigate this. Is this technology that we want to be using at the LTA? So it's a great way of learning about what the industry is doing. And for example, we actually had a live link. We use Skype, and we actually had someone presenting from London. So everyone here in Singapore could have his presentation about how the power for London Underground how the system had actually been laid out. So a really good learning opportunity.
What challenges do you and your team faces the capacity of Singapore, because Singapore has a limited space, and how do you handle it?
Well, Singapore is unique, isn't it? I mean, it is such a small place. When you consider that every time we build a line, we've got to build a depot for it. And depots normally are on the edge of cities, but they do take up a lot of space. So we have to look for innovative approaches. And so, for example, if you try and look for the depot on the Circle Line, you won't find it because we've buried it underground. Okay, so it's one of the biggest underground depots in the world. And if you look at as you go from Tanamera to Expo on the Changi branch, you'll see a huge building site. That building site is where we're going to put our 4-in-1 depot. So we're putting 3 depots. We're putting one underground, one at what we call grade, at ground level, and then one above it. So we're having to be very, very creative in how we use the space. We have to be efficient. But it is very, very challenging. Fortunately, Singapore, being quite a modern city, the roads are relatively straight, and the roads are relatively wide, which makes building the infrastructure much easier. Trying to do similar sort of projects in London with much narrower streets, where it's harder to divert the traffic and actually keep the city moving. Because when you build a project, you've still got to make sure that the city keeps moving during the construction phase. And so we go to a great deal of effort to make sure that we inconvenience the public as little as possible during the construction phase. But it is a real challenge.
So, what is the main and current problem of transport in Singapore, and how do you solve these problems?
The main problem in Singapore always has been the car, and it's the same problem for any city. And of course, Singapore has really solved that with the certificate of entitlement by restricting cars. But of course, once you restrict people's access to cars, you have to give them an alternative. And so, probably more than any other city in the world, Singapore is morally obliged to ensure that there is a very effective public bus system and MRT system. And that's a policy which the LTA is very, very aggressively really trying to implement. We have great support from the Ministry of Transport. It certainly helps in Singapore that it's basically one party that's always in charge. So you don't get the big changes in policy that other countries tend to get, where they want to do it a different way. So we get a lot of continuity. So it means that when we put plans in place, it's much easier to get those plans implemented. So it really does make that does make a very big difference to actually getting things done. Having a consistent government support to the plans really helps. That said, when the lines are breaking down, the Ministry of Transport, they really want to have a word with us. So we will get summoned to give them explanations as to why it's gone wrong and what we're doing to try and improve it. So.
What do you see in the future of transportation and commuting?
Well, the big challenge is where are we going with autonomous vehicles? I think it's a challenge which people don't really know where it's going. The technology does seem to be developing quite quickly. Clearly, there's been some sort of unpleasant accidents in the US with the technology, and so clearly people will be a bit wary about it. So there's going to be cultural issues. How are people going to actually perceive this? Will people want to sit in a car that drives itself? So there's a lot of people like driving cars. Some people actually enjoy driving cars. So how are they going to convert? And if you've got some people driving the cars manually and some people doing automated driving, how do the two coexist? So there's many challenges in that sector. In terms of metro technology, it's all about the reliability. So it's how can we make the systems more and more reliable. It's getting up to trying to meet the standards that Hong Kong has really set, trying to get up to sort of like what we call hundreds of thousands of kilometres between failures. So we're trying to get up to about 800,000. Very demanding target, and we're certainly not there yet. But we're making improvements, and it's all about adopting the correct technology. Efficient technology. It has to be cost-effective technology to ensure that the systems that we put in place operate efficiently and that we can move as many people as possible. Clearly the goal is to get an infrastructure network in terms of the MRT where 8 in 10 households are within a 10-minute walk. Once you've got that sort of access, the demand for the car then really should start to drop a bit. At least people will be able to do a lot more journeys without any need for a car at all. But there's a long way to go. So, I mean, 2030 is where the sort of like the main published plans go up to. So, and we've got a lot of work between now and 2030 in terms of Thompson East Coast Line. We've got downtown lines being finished and extended. There's Pungle extension. Lots and lots of lines to do.
What would you do to inspire future generations to pick up the opportunities?
I think what you have to do is you've got to show people what actually they can give back to society. I think it's very easy to say, "Oh, a job's interesting," but actually, when you show people, if you do this job, you are really making a contribution to society. You're doing something very, very positive. I think that's one of the key messages that I get. It's not just going to a bank, shuffling some money from accounts A to account B, coming home. You really do make a difference. Because if you get it wrong, people are going to say, "Why is my train late?" Whereas if you get it right, people really appreciate it. People really think, "Oh yeah, I'll take the MRT because I know I'll get from A to B." And so it's actually, if you show people just the impact you can have on other people's lives, then I think that's important.
What will be your advice to the students who are studying diploma or degree in PSB Academy?
Work hard. Qualifications do count for a lot. I mean, obviously, you can be successful without qualifications. There are people, but it's much harder work. So work hard and get those qualifications, but enjoy life at the same time. I think student life, I think they're some of the best days of your life. I certainly loved being a student. But that qualification is the start of your journey. It sets you on a path which obviously you shape your own destiny of where you're going to go. But if you get that qualification, it does open a lot of options to you. People want to see well-qualified people applying for their jobs. A lot of the roles that I'm recruiting for, it's got to be graduate. Or for the technician roles, they've got to have a diploma. So if you haven't got that, you're not going to get those engineering jobs. So it's very important, and also make sure that you're doing the right subject. If you're a couple of years in and you think this isn't really for me, then change. Because once you're in your career, it's really, really hard to change. Because you haven't got the fundamental knowledge to go into the other area that perhaps you really want to go, and the sacrifice then of having to say drop a salary becomes much harder. Especially if you've got a family to support, then perhaps you may end up trapped where you don't want to go. So make sure you're doing the course that's really right for you. That's really, really important.
Thank you so much for visiting the PSBC campus and sharing your thoughts on how to become a chartered engineer and sharing your life. It was a pleasure talking to you.
So it's excellent to see IET thriving here on campus. So it's a pleasure to come down and support you all here. And I'd like to wish you all very best of luck with your studies and have an exciting engineering future ahead of you. Thank you.